Hey, good morning. Scott Luton, right here with you on This Week in Business History. Welcome to today's show. We've got a wonderful episode teed up. We've already had a blast on the pre show. We should have been recording that. But we've got a great guest from an outstanding organization, amongst others, that are really making their mark. So stay tuned for a highly informative and intriguing conversation. Hey, quick programming note. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to find us wherever you get your podcast from. Find us across social media, including YouTube. And hey, we love hearing from our listeners, so we'd welcome your feedback. So, with no further ado, I want to introduce and bring in our featured guest here today. She's a lawyer, teacher, coach, author, empowerment self defense instructor. We'll find out a lot more about that. Our guest is a regular opinion columnist for the Pasadena Weekly, the Huffington Post, and other publications. She served as UN Press Corps credentialed journalist and delegate for big time United Nations conferences such as the Women's Conference in Beijing and the Conference Against Racism in South Africa. Our multifaceted guest has written plays, books, documentaries, so much more, and has served in a wide variety of leadership and board level roles for many organizations. Chief amongst them is the National Women's History Alliance, where we met. And it is at NWHA where she's found a home for her lifelong study and passion and love of women's history. So no further ado, let's welcome in Ellen Snortland. Ellen, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be on a history program. It's like, hey, you know what? Us history nerds need to hang together.
You know what? We were separated earlier. I feel like we're a lot of kindred spirits and camaraderie
Abs-
here already.
Absolutely.
It's important for history nerds to be well represented in any population, and I can't wait to hear your POV here today. So, all right. So before we get to the heavy lifting and get to a lot of the topics we're going to talk about, let's get to know Ellen better. So tell us, Ellen, if you would, where'd you grow up, and give us a couple anecdotes from your upbringing.
Well, I grew up in South Dakota, spent my summers in North Dakota, where my parents came from. And I was basically raised as a Norwegian American uh, because a lot of the little towns in North Dakota, especially, had um, communities that were based on wherever they came from when they homesteaded the prairies up there. And they tend to all kind of clump together, and the Norwegians go to the Norwegian town, and the German Russians go to the German Russian town, et cetera, et cetera. So I didn't think there was anything peculiar about being a Norwegian American until I moved to California. And I'm going, what accent? What are you talking about? you know, and all the jokes in a Norwegian American community are dumb blonde jokes, except some of the dumb blondes are men because we're all blonde. So
So, from a culture standpoint, Norwegian American home, from either traditions or food, or what's one thing that when you look back was special about that upbringing?
well, we ate a lot of Norwegian food, especially around holidays. The Norwegian foods that we ate were traditionally peasant foods, like the Norwegian relatives I still have in Norway wouldn't eat them to save their life because
Wow.
most kind of comfort foods from any country generally tend to be poor people's food.
Mm.
So in Norway, it would be lutefisk, which is a cod that's soaked in lye and dried so that Vikings could take dried fish with them when they came to conquer the world. And it's a wretched dish.
Mm.
I happen to like it because I grew up on it, but it's really just a butter delivery system. Um, because
Well, it's kind of like sushi for me. It's a wasabi delivery system. I love wasabi. I put it on everything.
oh,
So,
okay.
but going to your point, uh, goodness, so thankful for peasant food, as you put it, because that almost regardless of what country, that's given us some of our favorite global culinary delights. Right, it comes from all walks of life. I love that.
Yeah, yeah, that's what we have in common. And the Norwegians have a tortilla-like item, which is called lefse, and it's a potato-based. It's really a tortilla, but all poor people have something to wipe up food with because you don't waste the gravy on the plate. You
Right.
wipe it up with something, or just like it all makes sense. It's common sense food.
I love it. All right. So we're gonna talk about your professional journey in a moment. But what took you to California?
Ooh. When I was in high school, I fell head over heels in love with the football coach slash drama coach. It was a tiny little high school, and we were madly in love. I was underage, and we never did anything that was even remotely sexual. He was completely a gentleman, but we had this, oh my God, I loved him, and he loved me. And but rumors started that we were being sexual, and we weren't. He got fired, so he moved to California and got into Stanford in the acting program there, and then he went to a uh, repertory theater company in mid California called Santa Maria. And so I auditioned over the phone.
Wow.
I got in as a 16-year-old, and we he met my bus, and we uh, immediately saw that we despised each other. But it got me to California.
Love it. Love it. So would we're going to touch on some things you've been up to, but clearly from a creative side, that side of your brain, whichever, I forget if it's right or left, but from creating documentaries and of course writing books and acting, is that was he part of the your initial how you found your passion for that stuff? You said he was a drama teacher too.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to tell this now, but I was painfully shy.
Mm.
But I knew I wanted to have somewhat of a public life. I'm an ambivert. I'm both introverted and extroverted. If I had my druthers, I'd be reading all day long and tell you to leave me alone. Um, and I also love to write because it's a isolating kind of activity. However, excuse me, I'm so warm. Um,
I do the same thing.
yeah. Um, so we had a really interesting relationship because this was such a small high school. He decided he would teach a semester on Dostoevsky, and so I was his only student in that class, and we bonded over Crime and Punishment.
Wow, you don't hear that very often.
No, no. And then he decided he was going to direct uh, Murder in the Cathedral, which is about Thomas a Becket. And I said, there are no roles for women, and except the chorus, which all the great parts were for men, which was typical in high school theater. And so I was the single chorus person because he wanted a chorus of one person, and I was that. And that was the beginning of me playing leads in a lot of plays, which it's not accidentally called a lead. It's a lead because it is a leadership position,
Mm.
taking responsibility for how the play goes and learning your lines and showing up on time and all that stuff. So it really taught me leadership in a way that I hadn't had the opportunity for. But
Well,
so he tickled both the left side and right side of my brain because I also produced that play, and I realized I loved being the boss and I loved producing, and there weren't many women who were producing at that time either. So it was really the kernels of a large portion of my life.
so during that time period when you were there in the moment, were you conscious of the lack of female representation, both on the acting side, in the big roles, lead roles, and the production side, or is it something that you kind of reflected back on, and it dawned on you? Were you really, was it were you there? Did it don't did it smack you in the face when you were there in the moment?
Yes and no. I mean, not like it does now. It was kind of the way things were.
Mm.
Nobody questioned it. Uh, and I started to have hints of it, but it mostly came up with, "Hey, that's not fair. They get all the good parts." It's like, "Hey." And but my activism came, oh gosh, maybe 5 years later, because I started an all-woman theater company in Santa Barbara, California, because we were all really ticked off because we didn't get to direct, we didn't get to design, we didn't get to do any of that stuff. And had I known about Title IX at that time, I would have brought a Title IX lawsuit, because we didn't get the same education as the boys in the departments got. And what really ticks me off looking back on it is that the heads of these theater companies had to go raid the boys, um, the boys in orchestra, or the boys in chorus, or whatever, just to get enough boys to be in the theater production. And meanwhile, the theater department is full of girls who want to do all sorts of stuff, and we weren't allowed. So,
Wow. So forming that all female production company in Santa Barbara, that allowed all of the folks in that troupe or that organization to fill whatever role that their heart desired, right?
exactly. And
Mm.
everybody is like this. It doesn't matter what your gender is. You learn by doing. You learn by putting your butt on the line and producing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, so, you learn to be a leader by putting your money where your mouth is. And so we learned a lot.
Mm.
And
Love that.
yeah.
And an hour never does justice for these types of conversations. We'll have to have you back and dive deeper in some of the nooks and crannies, as it were, of your journey. Let's talk about. I can only imagine what you learned and the impact that just what you've shared has already had on your journey. But when you look back on other things you led, or projects that you managed, or what have you, what other key role comes to mind that really helped shape who you are and your worldview?
Well, being in Southern California and going for an acting career, um, I realized pretty soon on that I was going to have to be responsible for creating projects so I could participate in them. So, for instance, I'd always wanted to play Nora in A Doll's House, which is a Norwegian play, and I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to produce it. And so I got a hold of Ted Danson and I asked him to play my husband, and he said yes. And it's really been my unwillingness to sit around waiting for somebody to do something for me. It's like, you know what? And the other key thing is that I surprised, well, I did surprise a lot of people, but I survived a killer flood in South Dakota in 1972,
Hmm.
and I was only 19, and the cliches are so true. We came close to drowning. I saved both my parents from drowning, and I was only 19, and I saw my life flash before my eyes. And
Wow.
it was like one of those gifts that it could have really messed me up, but actually it inspired me, because I really said, wait a second, life is not a rehearsal, and it could be gone like that.
Mm.
Out of 27 people in my neighborhood, only 7 people survived, 3 of which were my parents and I.
Wow.
And we were only alive because I was a Cross certified um, lifeguard, and so not a lot of 19-year-olds get that opportunity to live through something and go, okay, I'm going to live my life a lot differently from now on.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. What city? That was North Dakota, right?
That was South Dakota, Rapid City, South Dakota. It was a
Okay.
killer flood. It killed a lot of people. And
So it sounds like what I heard, some of what you say there or allude to is your how important it was not to take one single day for granted. And did you from that point forward, was it were you a lot more intentional in terms of how you celebrated the small stuff and enjoyed the small stuff, as it were.
Yeah, and double dog daring myself to take something on that ordinarily I wouldn't have.
Mm,
Like,
mm.
who was I to start a theater company in Los Angeles? And who was I to call Ted Danson up and say, "Would you play my husband in a Norwegian play?" I mean, the word encourage is very important. Encouraging somebody, encouraging yourself, because it's so easy to chicken out and to say, "I'm not important enough," or "I'm not this enough," or whatever. You know what? This is it. Be here now.
I love that, and I completely agree with you. You never know what word or phrase or sentence or conversation you might be having or you might be sharing that gives someone else that encouragement to keep moving on. And that's some of what I'm hearing. And I love how your zest for life and how emboldened you to chase whatever passion you had and address and even target the injustices that clearly were rampant and still, unfortunately, to this day, are still yeah, everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so before this is so good, Ellen. I've got about 18 pages of notes already.
Oh.
Before we get to your eureka moment, what any other key positions? I know it's so tough to boil it down. It was so tough to come up with a credible introduction for you, given everything you've done. But what other position comes to mind that really shaped how you view the world?
Oh my goodness. Well, one of the things that I learned early on was that corporations, people who were presidents of things, were just people. Um, I'm of two worlds. I was raised to be an executive's wife. I was not raised to be an executive. Because that was the way my parents were, and that was their world, not mine. And so they didn't quite know how to relate to me in some ways. But on the other hand, they were both going, "Yeah, okay, that doesn't make sense to us, but you go." And
Love
so
that.
one of the things I did was um, I am a talented baker, and I made lots of Norwegian baked items, which for people in Southern California were pretty exotic. I mean, they're labor-intensive pastries and stuff like that. And I brought some into a group of people that I was working with, and one of them said, "Oh my God, these are amazing. Do you want me to introduce you to the food person at Carter Hawley Hale?" Which I didn't know what that was. It turned out they were oh, what would the word be for? They were basically the clearinghouse for Neiman Marcus and Bloomingdale's and a
Right.
lot of really big companies. And I said, "Sure, why not?" This is after the flood and everything. And it's like I've been a yes, I'll do that person. And so I stayed up all night and I made these incredible desserts. And I went like to the 40th floor of this skyscraper downtown, and I walked in with this beautiful sterling silver tray with all these goodies on it. And I walked in, and the man saw the tray, and a tear came down his face. And he said,
Wow.
"I haven't seen these since my grandma made them."
Mm, man,
And
that I'll tell you, food is just it is just that universal language that it just cuts through anything, and that's it's very special connections that can offer.
yeah. So then he picks up the phone and he talks to the purveyor of foods at Neiman Marcus and gets me an appointment like that. And this is a business history podcast, so I had no clue about business, none whatsoever. And I sit down with this hoity-toity buyer at Neiman Marcus, and he takes his placemat and he starts writing out an order. And I'm like, and I hadn't thought about the prices.
Wow.
I'm not a business person. I'm an arts person. I'm a creation person, and so I agreed to a price that ended up costing me money.
Wow.
Yes.
But still, you were able to claim you did business with Neiman Marcus, and they
Yeah.
wanted your artisan product, right?
Yes.
How
Yes.
cool was that?
Yeah.
Um, so you know, let's talk eureka moments for a minute. It's one of our favorite questions to ask folks, and whether it's a recent eureka moment or something you've already shared some of your learnings from your earlier aspects of your journey. What else uh, can you when you think back? What else really stands as a key lesson learned that maybe changed how you viewed business or history or how you viewed your purpose maybe? What comes to mind?
Well, so just to tie up the Neiman Marcus
Yeah.
conversation, is the man who cried when he saw my food. That was my eureka. It's like,
Mm,
oh, these are just simply people with memories and full lives and hearts. And I stopped being intimidated by big companies with that. I just went, oh, they're just like I am.
well,
So
and
that was important. And then uh, also in my career, I I had three callbacks to host the new dating game
really.
because I was really good at improv and on my feet, that kind of stuff. And it was like, oh my word, if this comes through, I could be making six figures starting next week. And it was just very exciting. And it's called the entertainment business, not because it's, entertaining necessarily, but it's a business. And I went for my fourth meeting, and the man looks at me and goes, "We are so sorry, but the last woman we tried just didn't work out."
Wow.
And I was stunned,
Mm.
at a loss for words. And man, if the rest of the business world went off whether the last if the last man had worked out or not, they wouldn't be hiring any men either. You know, it's like,
Right.
so I just went, so I represent all women all of a sudden.
Mm,
And I didn't sign up for that.
mm.
I signed up to be the best individual I possibly could be. But then the eureka part of that was I do represent, until we have equality for women and people of color and everything, we all represent each other,
Mm.
whether we want to or not.
Wow.
So the last woman we tried just didn't work out. So that broad screwed up my employment opportunity. It's
Well,
like
I hope
I
that
didn't even know her.
that experience and you sharing that experience since that time. I'm hoping, you know, we always look for silver linings. I mean, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's, we hear about experiences like you're sharing and despite the disappointment right then and the disappointment that doesn't even do it justice. The foolishness and the short-sightedness and the sexist perspective of that conversation you had. I bet how you've used that experience and share with others, you've turned that really negative experience into hopefully a lot of learnings for many others.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And that was a nice guy,
Mm.
and he just didn't understand what nonsense that was to say it out loud to me like I was supposed to go, "Oh, okay." It's like, and he probably wouldn't say that 30 years later because
Right.
he'd understand how absurd it was.
Mm.
But at the time, the climate, the soup we were swimming in, it was, and I had another experience like that where I was directing for a show called, and again, very few women got to direct, maybe point one point, I don't
Mm.
know. It was a very, very small percentage of women got to direct TV or films. And I got to direct for a Fox show called Totally Hidden Video.
Hmm.
And I was the crew's favorite director. I was also the cast's favorite director, but somebody in the executive suite uh, took umbrage at me being there. I was the only woman. that was behind the camera, and he just didn't like me. I'd never even met him. I still haven't ever met him. And so my supervising producer called me in because I wasn't getting scheduled for shoots anymore. And I called him up and I said, "Hey, what's going on?" So he said, "You better come in." And so I went in, and I wish I'd had a tape recorder. He shuts the door and he says, "Well, so and so does not like you." And I said, "I don't even know so and so." And he says, "Yeah, I know." And I said, "Is there a specific complaint?" And he said, "Yeah, you don't get enough jiggle." And I said,
Wow.
What does that mean?" And he said, "Well, jiggle is when the other directors have downtime in between hidden camera bits. They surreptitiously take shots of women's breasts and women's butts as they walk by without having to get permission because they're not identifying the person." And I said, "It wouldn't even occur to me to do that. To first of all, invade somebody's privacy like that, and secondly, I'm into dogs, so if I were going to take surreptitious pictures, it would be of the cute doggies."
Bucco and Bella as proof of that.
Yes, yes, and he said, "Well, I'm sorry because you're a really good director," and that broke my heart more than anything, I think, because I had found my niche. Uh, Generally, when there's trouble for a woman director, it's because the crew doesn't like her.
Mm.
And I'm a real team player. I was bringing up young female production assistants, and I'm fun, and I made my sets fun, and everybody really appreciated that. But that man, that executive just hated my guts.
Wow. I can't imagine. I can't, like you said, you wish you had a tape recorder.
Yeah,
I can't even, it doesn't even feel like reality when I hear
I know.
conversations like that so deeply impact talented, all people's career prospects and journey. I can only imagine how crushing that was, and especially the lack of reasoning behind it. Just it's crazy.
And if I'd gotten Jiggle, then he would have made me wrong for that because he would have accused me of not being a straight person or whatever. I mean, it was just like he was just cruising for something.
Mm. Well, so I want to move. So there's lots of books and other creative outlets, documentaries that you've created, and I want to talk about one in particular that hasn't been released just yet, and it's called "Biting the Hands That Squeeze Us." And talk about a title that really brings you in. So tell us, if you would, a couple of maybe a key takeaways. First off, when do you think it will be? Tell us a story about getting it released first, maybe.
Okay, well, there is a saying, and I don't know who started it. Maybe Stephen King. I'm not sure, but it's "kill your darlings," which means people, writers especially, can get so attached to the way they wrote something or titles or whatever. And um, I started writing this, 3 years ago, and it was going to be a collection of anecdotes about what happened to me as a woman in entertainment and media. That anecdote being one of them, and because it wasn't violent, but it was violent toward my um, stature as a person in the entertainment industry. It was violent toward my economic status, to all of a sudden be let go because of that. Do you know? So biting is a theme that goes throughout my creative career because biting is a really great boundary, but it doesn't necessarily damage somebody beyond belief.
Mm.
you know, um, I am going to get around to your question.
Yeah, no. This is, this is for me. This is a foreign world, and I really love it. It's such a big blind spot. I mean, all of my content has been focused just on kind of one medium, which is podcasting, which
Right.
is very prevalent these days. So it's very intriguing, and I better listen for our listeners too, for so many of our listeners that also have it, you know, been in the entertainment industry, and to hear these experiences, even though some of the experiences that you're sharing are disappointing, to hear that goes on with the territory. But it's intriguing to hear someone in the in the entertainment industry share their journey, especially with given what you have gotten accomplished. So,
Right.
kill your darlings. That's going to be. We might have found our title. Whoever we borrowed that from. I love that.
Well, so I love the title so much. I was reluctant to have my book take a different tack. And remind me to get back to biting and why
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
so important
sure.
to me. But um, uh, I am now taking a completely different tack, and it's a memoir that is made up of letters to my late father and sharing my experiences.
Mm,
And because he was born in 1913, and he encouraged me every single step of the way, and I was a daddy's girl, and he loved my guts. He said, "You have more guts than a packing plant." And he loved that, but I was certainly not cut of the same cloth as the women in his generation. And a lot of times he was like, "Ooh, really? You're gonna do that?" And I said, "Yes, I'm gonna do that." So
we
he,
need people like that. We need people
yeah,
to constantly push that envelope,
yes,
and because for all the followers that will come through whatever trail they're blazing. So I love that.
yeah. So now it's probably going to be Biting the Hands That Squeeze Us is probably going to be the name of a chapter within that book. And I'm going to call it probably Dear Snook. That was his nickname because I Googled Dear Daddy and ooh, really ucky, like motorcycle erotica. And ooh, it was just like, ooh, no, 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 no. So I
Dear
don't think
Snook.
yes.
Dear Snook, it is. Uh, well, are they, so this book that's going to be comprised of letters written to your late father, Snook, are they, will they be all based on real letters, or will it be a mix of letters you wrote and some experiences maybe you didn't document?
Well, yeah, I mean, um, for instance, I kind of the letters I'm writing to him are right now is like I think of my dad every day, and you know, I pretend I'm carrying him around on my shoulder because I know how much he would enjoy my life. And if it weren't for my father and my mother, I wouldn't be having the life that I have. So the letters are, Dear Daddy, this weekend we're going to go to a Greek restaurant that you would love. And then you know, so and then so that same letter goes, "Oh, I don't think I told you I was invited to give a sermon at the church that my friend is a minister at because she needed a day off. So I gave the sermon this last Sunday, and I hope you enjoy it." And then I have the sermon.
Mm.
So the sermon is introduced kind of by the letter to my father. I don't know if that makes sense,
I
but
I love it. I think, and look, you're the expert here, but when I hear you describe that, it gives you so much leeway artistically and creatively to share all sorts of experiences that I bet Snook would really, really appreciate, just in the little bit I know. So I
yeah.
love it. So I'm looking forward to that, and we'll have to have you back on when you publish it and share some of those letters. Um, so
Oh, I
let's,
wanted to get back to biting. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
please, yeah.
Okay. So, I teach self-defense and I'm
Well, before you move forward, when you say that, because I'm glad you brought that up, are you talking about in the sense of, I took a Zen Shotokai, a form of karate, as a kid.
uh-huh.
Is that the type of self defense we're talking about, based on, you know, um, hand to hand, physical self defense?
I teach hand-to-hand combat, yes,
Okay.
but not based on any of the martial arts because this is something else a lot of people don't think about. And that is almost all the martial arts were created by men for men and
Mm,
men's circumstances and men's bodies.
mm,
And the people who attack women and kids are not honorable people. They don't follow any particular protocols or rules of martial arts. They sneak up on you, they attack you from the back. They are completely dishonorable people. Now, that said, I encourage people to take martial arts, but that's not what we teach. We teach dirty street fighting, and because the people who attack us are dirty street people.
Mm.
And often there's somebody we live with. It's not that I'm casting aspersions on street people. It's that there's no honor among people who attack people that they think can't fight back.
Right. They're
Um,
looking to probably take any advantage to do whatever whatever their
yeah,
objective is. So, all right.
absolutely.
So you're teaching self defense, and I love that. That was a blind spot for me. I didn't even stop to think about how the martial arts, what point of view, what perspective that they were derived from. So tell us, you're going to connect, I think, self defense with biting the hands that squeezes.
Well, yes. And so when I teach self-defense, I teach with um, lived experience. I've been assaulted. I
Mm.
know what it's like to be attacked. I know what it's like to be walking around in a woman's body in this world, and constantly having to deal with it doesn't happen now that I'm older, but when I was younger, of groping and whistling and making sounds. And uh, it was like walking in a world that most of my men friends had no clue about because it didn't happen to them. So if it didn't happen to them, it must not happen.
Right.
Well, those guys that were doing that, they didn't do it in front of nice men. And one of the things I teach is that, look, if you're walking down the street and you happen upon a dog that's growling and snarling, and you see the hackles are up on the back of their necks, what do? Well, you back away, you cross the street, you avoid them, you listen to them, but what don't you do? You don't check to see if it's a male or a female.
Mm.
And then go, oh, well,
True.
that's just a girl dog. I'm going to go in there and pet it. No, you don't. You do not, because that female dog is just as potentially dangerous as the male. But we've gendered danger to such a point that the people that attack women assume that there will be no consequences from that female.
Right.
And we've trained females to be so afraid of threatening males that they assume there's nothing they can do. So we've really objectified men and we've objectified women because the truth is men are just people. They're just people.
Sure. Just going back to your point about presidents, hey, they're just people. They're not on a platform. They put their clothes on the same way that anyone else puts their clothes on.
That's
So
right. That's right.
excellent point.
Yeah. So, the action movies, as much as I enjoy a good action movie as anyone else, they have solidified the danger that men pose to such a degree that it's mythical. We assume that men are cyborgs or that they can take a fire extinguisher to the head and get right back up. I mean, and the action movies escalate, so the level of violence escalates,
Mm.
and it just looks like, boy, there's no way that I could defend myself. And it's not even like those things are thought about.
Right.
we
Sure.
we accept them, even though we, at some intellectual level, we go, oh, that's choreographed, that's not real. But the impact of it sits at a different place than our intellect.
Right.
So
Especially when you see it time and time and time again. It's that subconscious reinforcement, which can be so dangerous when I would assume I've never been the victim of an assault, but if instantly, to your point, you don't believe in your ability to fight back and to stave off the attack, options and outcomes will be limited, and that's probably a pretty dangerous aspect. So,
yeah, absolutely.
and to your, I'm on your website now,
Which one?
beauty, I know,
Yes,
beautybitesbeast.com.
yes, uh-huh.
And I've got, speaking of assault, I see your factoid you've got here. The World Health Organization conservatively estimates that 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced gender-based violence in their lifetimes,
Yeah.
and people in the development world know that is a very low estimate.
Hmm.
Holy cow! I've just shared with you. I'm however many. We don't date ourselves here. My partner Greg White says nothing over 2 decades is our rule of thumb. But for me to have gone through it my entire life without having been assaulted, to hear that 1 in 3 number globally, it instantly brings such a far more important element to what you're doing in the self defense training. So,
Yeah, we don't
um,
talk about it. Women don't share with each other necessarily about it. Probably not. Now, I grew up in a family with three daughters. I'm the youngest one. My eldest sister just passed away this past year, and all three of us have been assaulted. So
mm,
that's three for three. And I
wow,
didn't know about my sister's assault until 2 years ago when here I am. This is my field, is violence prevention. She didn't really tell me until 2 years ago.
man,
And it
um,
was her accountant, her accountant, her
wow,
accountant. She came in for a tax meeting and he said, well, if you give me oral sex, I will refrain from reporting you to the IRS. And she said, for what? He says, nothing. I'll just make something up.
unbelievable,
And then,
unbelievable.
and then she was so scared of him, she did. And she
Mm,
was so ashamed of herself. And I said, the shame goes to that guy. What were you going to do?
mm, right, unbelievable. So let's all of this that you're sharing. I think I know you're involved in a lot of boards and leadership teams, and through a lot of your volunteer leadership. But the one where we met, the National Women's History Alliance (NWHA), um, you know, it adds to the mission, the criticality of the mission that the NWHA has. So, if you could shed a little bit of light on the organization and its purpose and your involvement.
Well, it was started by Molly McGregor, this sweet woman who was a history teacher. And in 1980, she was teaching a regular history course, and a young man in her class said, what's women's liberation? What's that? And she said, well, let me see if I can find something that you can read and about it historically. And she had a library full of books at home. She went and looked. Then she looked in the school library. She could find one paragraph after all these resources that talked about women being given the vote.
Wow.
So wait a second. So if aliens landed and looked through our history books, it's as if women never existed. And it's as if Native Americans never existed. And the people that are MIA existed and not only accomplished survival, but accomplished inventions and all sorts of creative things and just, an astonishing amount of history that has been ignored.
Mm.
And, you know, we didn't even notice that we were missing. That's the part that blows my mind. How come I didn't notice we were so missing? Well, if how here's an existential question. How do you know that something's missing if it's missing?
True. You don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So she started jumping into it and delving into it, and then eventually she got other people to participate with her, and that was in Santa Rosa, California,
And this is
and
Molly, right? This is the
Molly,
founder of the National
NWA.
Women's History
Yeah.
Alliance.
And then she got together with a bunch of uh, um, sisters, as it turned out, and petitioned Congress to make the month of March Women's History Month. And that was in 1987. It took 7 years to do that, but we did it. I wasn't involved yet. Um, and, you know, so we are alive and doing what we do because there's such a gap. And our store provides curriculum and balloons and fun stuff for kids, boys too. Boys need to know women's history
Right.
because they're raised to think that we're not of much consequence, and that's not their fault, you know. And it was there was a time, for instance, my father, he loved Eleanor Roosevelt and he loved Amelia Earhart, and he looked up to women as something other than just sex objects. He followed Amelia Earhart's journeys, and the whole country cared about what happened
Right.
when she went missing. I mean, little boys too. And so the sexualization of women has damaged our esteem in the eyes of the public, in my humble opinion. But to have women valued only for their jiggle um, does a disservice to not only them, but to boys and men. And
Mhm.
so, and here is a heartbreaking story about Amelia Earhart. There were not a lot of ham radio operators that were girls. They were
Right.
discouraged from staying away from things like that. And a little girl got an SOS from what was Amelia Earhart's plane. And she called I guess it was oh, what's the call? The aviator, the FAA,
Yes. Yes.
or whatever it was called at the time, and said, I've gotten an SOS and I believe it's Mrs. Putnam's airplane, because she was married to George Putnam,
Hmm.
and they ignored it because it was a girl.
Wow. Unbelievable. And as we all know, to this day, we haven't really found out with overwhelming scientific proof exactly what took place. It is a fascinating individual, Amelia Earhart, and the story only adds to the intrigue. But gosh, talk about the bravery to jump into aircraft solo or just with a co-pilot and do the things she did.
Oh,
Um,
Fred Noonan was her navigator and a
right,
drunk.
that's right.
So,
Yeah,
gee, getting on a plane with a
co-
drunk navigator, what could happen?
that's a good point. That is a good point, and I shouldn't have said co-pilot. Um, well, it is. So going back to the challenge you illustrated, it is frustrating. So what do we, beyond supporting, getting involved, and by the way, to our listeners, the NWHA is a wonderful site beyond what Ellen here has shared. It's a great site if you like research and you like milestones. You don't get enough of what they cover on this site elsewhere, and that's a shame. But y'all check that out in, let's say, National Women's History Alliance.org is the URL. And we'll include that in the show notes. But Ellen, go back to, we're going to move forward here in a minute. We're going to talk about other inspiring women that you've really enjoyed throughout business history. But if you're speaking right now, we've got our community is a business one, right? Community business leaders, organizational leaders. If you had their captive audience for just a couple of minutes, which is more than what we get here in the goldfish era, right? 7 seconds and the folks are gone. But how could what would your advice be if they really want to enable opportunities for all and really help create more inclusive talent pipelines into all industries? What advice would you share?
Well, it's two pronged. One prong is to wake up men to what they could possibly be missing, because it's not just women there for women's sake. Uh, Two is to wake up women that they don't have to be perfect to fit into a culture. Women are so afraid of failing and looking stupid that they don't allow themselves to go for it. And men don't understand that women bring something special to the table. If they're allowed, if they create a safe enough space without sexual harassment, without, you know, bullying, um, that, okay, I'm going to give you two anecdotes.
Yeah, please.
everybody knows who Ben Franklin was.
Mm.
Ben Franklin was aware of the impact of the Iroquois nation uh, when the founding fathers were putting together the Constitution. And he understood that the Iroquois, their real name is Haudenosaunee, by the way. They didn't call themselves the Iroquois. That was the French name for the extensive nation. It was a confederation of 6 or 7 tribes in northern New York and in the south corner of Canada. And they had had a working democracy for 1,000 years.
Wow.
1,000 years of a very successful democracy. Why? Because the clan mothers noticed that they were decimating each other. The nations were fighting so much that the women said, cut it out. We have got to come together and create a way to govern ourselves that we're not killing each other. Come on. So they developed a democracy where women had as much of a say in how things go as the men did. And Ben Franklin knew about their democracy. He had Iroquois elders come to Philadelphia to advise the founding fathers on creating a democracy. The chiefs walked in, looked around, and the first thing they said was, where are the women?
Wow.
Where are the women? So that's been my mantra too. And I will invite men business owners, business partners to adopt that mantra and ask, where are the women? Where are they?
Love that. That's the first time I've ever heard that story, and the story is a good one. But the power of that question is even better. So I really appreciate you sharing that. But you said you had one mother. You had two
Ah,
anecdotes.
what was it? Ah,
Uh,
oh,
well, so we were
oh,
asking.
oh, 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 oh. Well, it has to do with women, uh, women's fear, and these are all generalizations, but women's fear of failure. I was a adjunct faculty member at Cal State LA, and I had huge classes, and I would pose a question, and inevitably the young men would raise their hands, and the young women did not. And so I said, I'm going to stand here until the women raise their hands. And I'm not going to do anything until women raise their hands. So they're kind of like, and I said, what your brothers have that you don't have is they are not afraid that they're going to represent all men if they answer incorrectly. And they are not afraid to fail on behalf of themselves or their brothers. They never have to deal with, oh, gee, if I look stupid, it's going to make all men look stupid. And, you know, that is a huge burden.
Right.
Like the last woman we had didn't work out. It's like, and it's unconscious. It's not like it's even in people's minds, but it's there nonetheless.
And such a it's unconscionable, right? That those conversations that you've shared and the excuses and the lack of any kind of common sense or rationale and injustice behind it, it truly is unconscionable. And that's the important, because of that. Um, and what I've learned just from my personal journey is, based on where you grew up in South and North Dakota, right? And so what was taking place there is what you knew, right? Well, we all come up in different spots, and we have different blind spots, right? And I think one of the great challenges we have had, continue to have, will continue to have, sadly, is ensuring that everyone understands and they know that they have a blind spot, and that blind spot is where these injustices continue to thrive, because it not encourages, but it creates inaction, because it takes away from the credibility of many other people's experiences and unfair scenarios, conversations, injustices, the experiences you've shared, all of that thrives partially because of the blind spot that we all have to some degree, or greater degrees in some cases. So this conversation here, uh, um, it helps attack and create more awareness and attack these blind spots, which is so important. So thank you very much for sharing thus far your journey and those some of those moments where it's just unbelievable. And if you start to question reality, Ellen, you start to question reality and sanity. What are we doing?
Oh, I know. The the anecdote I was trying to remember.
Mm,
Um, Women in the 70s started to um, invade heretofore male-dominated spaces,
mm,
and one of those spaces they invaded was archaeology. There were no women out on digs, or if there were, they were always very rare. And when you're the only one in a group of people, it's not easy to break through cultural bias. However, on this one dig, they uncovered a deer antler that had 28 slashes on it. And the male that uncovered it lifts it up and he goes, "Wow, this must have been a great season. They probably bagged 28 deer in this, one hunting expedition." And the woman goes, "Excuse me, I think that's a woman keeping track of her menstrual cycle."
wow. But different perspective.
And, so who invented calendars, I wonder? And I have writing students who assume that the paintings in the caves were by men. Well, based on what? Were you there? Why couldn't it have been women? Why couldn't it have been anybody? It's like you don't know, but we have this blind spot, all of us, men and
Right.
women, that it must have been men if it was important.
All
And
right.
that is just not so.
It's a dangerous way to view the world. But it is a blind spot. And to some degree, your lack of knowledge. I mean, the onus is on each of us to find that blind spot, but then to do something about it. And that's where as I was talking to someone the other day, Ellen, I have resigned myself to no more Facebook and LinkedIn, social media. Duke it out, right? If you don't believe in unconscious bias, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm just going to continue to spotlight experiences, and hopefully folks have epiphanies that I've been fortunate to really be taught. Because it's a blind spot for a reason, because it doesn't come to you naturally, right? But nevertheless, um, let's talk about, on a different note. And I love these anecdotes, by the way. I think Ellen, you could write for a wide variety of different books. That Let's talk about other inspiring leaders when it comes to women in business history, or any kind of history. Who else comes to mind that really you love to read about, that you're inspired by, that maybe even you modeled some of your pioneering spirits after?
Well, one of my favorite women in history that really got buried by other women. Um, by the way, I don't think men are bad. I don't think women are good. I think we're all people, and we are human beings first, and our gender, is a very, very, very strong factor of it, but we're all people.
Right.
So that's where I come from, and our blind spots are equal.
Yeah.
And it's not a personal flaw.
Right, right.
No,
Everybody has them. It
that's right.
doesn't matter. Whatever walk of life, everyone has it. And I think the important thing, and just not your words, my words, what I have learned from folks that really have moved the needle the most in different educational and eureka moments, is folks that they're um, not criminalizing. No one is the enemy, right?
That's
And
right.
they're not attacking men, because they know, as you said it a little while ago, men have to be part of the solution that create opportunities for all, and to address in a meaningful and a positive way the injustices that are
Right.
part of
Right.
society. So I appreciate where you come from, and thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, and it's yeah, demonizing each other is not going to get us anywhere. Has it
Right.
worked so far? No, not so much. Um, so a woman named Matilda Joslyn Gage. Oh my word. We are impacted by her today because her son-in-law was L. Frank Baum, the author
Yeah.
of The Wizard of Oz. And it's not an accident that the protagonist of one of the most important movies in all our lives was a little girl, because Matilda Joslyn Gage impacted L. Frank Baum. Her daughter was married to him, and they used to have very, very long conversations about gender and the role of women and men and all that. And um, you'll see when you watch Beauty Bites Beast, my documentary, I feature the Wizard of Oz because what does Dorothy do? She slaps the Cowardly Lion on the nose, boop, and he goes, "What did you do that for?" And he jumped out at her and to scare her,
Right.
and she defended herself with a non-lethal physical action. And uh, I forget what she says to him, but we've grown up with that,
Right.
and that's what I'm teaching women to be able to do,
Love that.
is to set a boundary. And we have an example of that where she didn't want to hurt him permanently or anything like that, but she wanted to let him know that was not okay. She delivered an immediate consequence, right? So Matilda Joslyn Gage, here's another thing she did. In the commemoration of the Statue of Liberty, no women were invited
Hmm.
for the commemoration. And here's this giant woman in the harbor of New York City. No
Right.
women were invited. There may have been one or two wives of dignitaries, but that was it.
I'm laughing to keep from crying. By
I
the
know.
way,
I know.
it is unbelievable.
Yeah. So what Matilda did is that she hired a cattle freight boat, because that was the only boat she could find that was available, because a lot of people were sailing around Liberty Island to see this big deal, and she she got a cattle boat. It's got cattle crap all over it, and these ladies with their weird shoes and corsets and everything, and they're carrying signs, votes for women. They had horns, and I mean, I just love the chutzpah and uh, the willingness to make a scene
Yes.
that was nonviolent. And Gandhi got his ideas about nonviolent social change from watching women in the United States and in England.
Mm,
And Gandhi and Martin Luther King stand on the shoulders of women,
mm,
and they don't get mentioned much.
mm.
you know.
That's a good point. You know, over the last weekend, I think it was, my wife and I watched, my wife Amanda and I watched the National Geographic series called Genius, Aretha. And it's all about Aretha Franklin. And I got, we wrapped that series. We binged watched it because it was really that good. All the music that was incorporated naturally, and the acting, but more importantly, the story and the history, and all that I didn't know that she had to fight through from childhood. Uh, it was just the latest wonderful piece of entertainment, but with purpose, that really reaches out and inform, grabs you, but really informs. These journeys, these incredible journeys that these legendary figures come through, and yes, even some of the non legendary. Because to your point, as you've alluded a couple times, so many figures, historical figures, many women that made a big impact. They aren't legendary because they weren't recognized, they weren't included, and they weren't documented. So that's a huge challenge as well, and one that I'm really glad to see the NWHA capture. So even the simple things like the birthdays of some of the historical figures, that you may have not learned about.
You and Amanda will love Tina, the HBO documentary about Tina Turner. Oh my word. So good. Oh my
Oh,
goodness. My husband and I watched that the other night, and
we'll have to
my
tackle that
husband
next.
and I are very, very close, and he's my partner in so many things, and he encourages me. I had a great dad, and therefore I picked really great men. I've never had jerk men in my personal life at all.
Well, as our regular co-host here at the This Week in Business History, Kelly Barner likes to say, "Life's too short for jerks. No jerks allowed." So I'm with you. Men, women, doesn't matter.
No,
Um,
there are
so,
plenty of jerk women too.
um, and your husband's name?
Ken Gruberman.
Ken Gerberman. All right. Well, shout out to Ken. Big
Yeah.
appreciate his partnership and role in this journey, this exciting journey of yours. And we're just scratching the surface here. So all right. So it is now. Let's go travel on a little time travel trip here. Let's say it's 2121, 100 years in the future. We're living, as we both know, for the thousandth time, but it's so true. It is cliche. Extraordinary times, right? Very unique times on a number of different fronts. Who do you think, especially when it comes to women leaders and women innovators and pioneers and folks right there in the trenches, fighting through to prevent some, address some of the injustices, regardless of from what angle. Who are we going to be talking about in 100 years?
Oh, I think we'll be talking about Greta Thunberg and Malala. Um, they are on the cutting edge of young people, not just girls, but including girls, in making a ruckus, making a scene, and saying, you know what? This climate change thing, this keeping women in the dark thing does not work. Malala put her life on the line to teach girls to read.
Mm,
And, you know, as backward as I think the United States is on sexism and racism, um, we are not the worst in the world. We're not the best in the world either. But that the Taliban is active in keeping girls from getting educated, uh, and see, I look at those girls and go, that might be the girl that cures cancer. That might be the girl that figures out how to replenish uh, um, the dying uh, fish stock in the
right.
ocean. That might, we don't know whose lives we're wasting. And Greta, wow, talk about walking her talk. Oh my God. And she and her generation are going, hey, hey, you know what, boomers? And I hate that word, but it's true. It's like,
Right.
you know what? We're living into a future of chaos.
Right.
All we can see right now is that with climate change being denied by a lot of people who I believe ought to know better, and who kind of willy nilly keep addicted to oil. I'm addicted to oil. I keep driving. I'm not walking.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, but it's true.
Right.
It's true. So I think they'll be talking about girls like Malala and Greta.
Love
Um,
that. I love all, I say exactly what's on my mind, and for the better or for worse. And I'll tell you, Ellen, I enjoyed our pregame discussion, really enjoyed this discussion. There's so much we can't get to, but it's been a pleasure to get to know you better. And I'll tell you too, one of my favorite podcasts that we did here, This Week in Business History is one of several under the Supply Chain Now umbrella, was focused on Rose Knox. And I would not have learned the story of Rose Knox, even though I stocked as a grocery stock person in my first job ever, making $4.35 an hour. The product that Knox gelatin, right? Everyone, I mean, if you've been in a grocery store, you've seen it, and certainly if you cook. Rose Knox, I stumbled across her story from the NWHA website. Never was taught about it, and it's such a powerful story. And I'm not going to dive into it extensively, but two quick things. Her husband died very instantly, or very quickly and suddenly, back in the 1910s, and they had built a successful business, And all of her friends at the time encouraged her, hey, women don't run businesses. This is like 1918, 1919, as I recall. And she said, she told them all, basically get lost. We're going to do this. So she took the reins of the manufacturing operation, right? So that's really cool. But one of the first things she did when she took the reins is the company was forcing certain of its employees to come through the back door, right? And the very first thing she said she did is close that back door and said, look, we're a family, we're a team. Everyone is coming through that front door. And I would have never, wouldn't have come across that story, which there's so much, and that's just tip of the iceberg, much like you. There's so much to that would inspire and empower, and that you can learn from and share with others. Um, and really from the great information y'all published there, just on the free stuff that you don't even have to order. So y'all check out National, let's see, let me get the URL right, nationalwomen'shistoryalliance.org. A lot of good stuff. And of course, that's how I met Ellen Snortland, which has been a great interview here on This Week in Business History. So let's make sure, Ellen, how can folks connect with you in particular? We've kind of shared the NWHA angle. How can folks check in on all the great projects you're leading?
Well, go to my website, beautybitesbeast.com, or my website, authorbytebybyte.com.
I like that.
I if you've been avoiding writing a book, I can help you get unstuck. And you know, and to watch Beauty Bites Beast, I love that it saves lives. And you can get access to Beauty Bites Beast on my uh, website, beautybitesbeast.com. And, it's like, hey, life is too short to be around jerks.
Right. That's true.
So
That is
let's teach
right.
each other how to handle jerks, okay?
And encourage others and encourage them, as you were saying earlier, not to quit. Laura Cesari came on one of our live streams earlier, and she talked about her journey um, uh, several decades back as she was going through engineering classes at I think it was at University of Tennessee. I think it was. But anyway, she's going through engineering, one of the few women in the student body, and she had one professor, Ellen. She got a D, and he, in front of the whole class, he held the paper up, her grade, and said, "This is why women should not be engineers." And she came this close to quitting, but she had some folks in her network that really helped encourage her not to quit. And she's gone on to do some huge things in industry and manufacturing and engineering and operations. But all that would have never happened if she'd given into those doubts that we all have at different points in time. So I love your message. I love so many components of your message. We'll have to have you back. Best of luck with the latest and greatest, the Biting the Hands That Squeeze Us, which will be a chapter of the new book called Dear Snort.
Dear Snook.
Snook. Sorry. Close. Dear Snook. I should have written that down. Well, all the best. Ellen Snortland's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for spending time with us
Thank
here
you
today.
so much. It's so nice to be with you. You're so present and so real. And I love nerding out with you.
Well, we'll do it again really soon. Thanks so much, Ellen.
Thank you.
All right. So to our listeners, gosh, hopefully you enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. We ran a wide range of topics, but hey, that's nothing new for us here at This Week in Business History. Ellen is such a great, not only a great interview, but there's so much to learn from her journey, and I really appreciate how she's spotlighting that so other folks can attack that blind spot that we talked about. And hey, if you take anything away from this conversation, embrace that question: where's the women at, that Ellen shared with us? So, hey, on behalf of our entire team here at This Week in Business History, hope this finds you well and you have a great week wherever you are. But most importantly, hey, do good, give forward, be the change, be like Ellen Snortland. And on that note, we'll see you next time here on This Week in Business History. Thanks, everybody.